Who among us didn't get fascinated by the legends and myths of the ancient world in our childhood? And they were not just entertaining stories for extracurricular reading. The legendary past of ancient Greece and ancient Rome occupies numerous pages in school history textbooks. Starting from the 18th century, knowledge of so-called ancient history became a measure of a person's education. That's why for centuries students have been memorizing the names of Roman gods and emperors, dates of great Roman battles, and the years of construction of grand Roman structures. In this film, we will try to figure out what this ancient Roman history is all about. Is it genuine past or literary myth? Looking at these books neatly arranged on the bookshelves, it seems as if the entire history of humanity is also organized and, most importantly, authentically known. It seems that every historical fact described in these books surely has documentary evidence. However, any serious researcher of world history knows that it is not the case, because most of these stories are based not on authentic documents, but on myths and legends. The story of Francesco Petrarca, an outstanding writer of the Renaissance era, illustrates that legends often originated out of thin air. It is believed that he was one of the first researchers of ancient Rome and a passionate propagandist of its greatness. Petrarca was overcome with sacred awe at the sight of Italian ruins. Already being an authoritative and well-known poet, he entered the second period of his life, a period of wandering. In France, Flanders, and Germany, he acquainted himself with scholars, examined monastery libraries in search of forgotten manuscripts of ancient authors. But the ancient Roman monuments aroused greatest interest. Therefore, Petrarca set off for the Eternal City, which greeted him with a multitude of legends. For example, here they would say that Apollo was an astrologer, the god of Saracens, and even the devil. They considered Plato a physician, and Cicero a knight and troubadour. Many of these legends openly irritated Petrarca. They completely contradicted his idea of the supposed ancient antiquity. Moreover, all this chaos of myths and literary sources absolutely contradicted what Petrarch saw in reality. He wrote, "Where are the baths of Diocletian and Caracalla? Where is the temple of Mars the Avenger? Where are the sanctuaries of Jupiter the Thunderer on the Capitoline Hill and Apollo on the Palatine Hill?" In books, you find everything, but when you search for them in the city, it turns out they have disappeared, or only a pitiful trace remains. It must be said that Petrarca was a person with an acute, slightly hysterical perception of reality. Therefore, he constantly mistook his desires for reality. It was difficult for him to part with the image of Rome that he had once mentally drawn for himself. The haze of dreams clouded Petrarch's gaze so much that when looking at the clear inscription, Cestio Epulon, made on the famous mausoleum pyramid of Cestias in Rome, he insisted that it was the tomb of Remus. From the multitude of stories heard and read, Petrarca selected only those legends that seemed historically accurate to him. thus creating a sort of unified legend. But apart from that, Petrarca did not leave to posterity any evidence of the antiquity of Rome, in which he was so convinced. Everyone knows the legend about the founders of Rome, the brothers Romulus and Remus. In this legend, a she-wolf suckled the brothers. This classical motif is depicted in a bronze sculpture installed in the Capitoline Museum in Rome, which is known as the Capitoline wolf. Art historians claim that the sculpture was made in the 5th century BC. Interestingly, only the wolf sculpture is dated to the 5th century, while the figures of the twins, according to the official version, were made between 1471 and 1509 AD. In other words, supposedly, the wolf stood alone for 2,000 years. And in the 15th century, a certain master named Antonio del Pollaiolo created figures of the twins she nursed. But why do historians date the she-wolf to the 5th century BC? It is believed that supposedly ancient authors such as Cicero, Pliny, and Titus Livius mentioned this sculpture. According to some accounts, it stood on the Roman Forum, while others claim it was on the Capitoline Hill, where its replica is currently located. However, the description of the sculpture found in the works of these authors does not correspond to the image we see today. Ancient Roman historians wrote that the she-wolf was licking the twins, indicating that her muzzle was turned towards them. Therefore, it referred to a completely different sculpture. The first mention of this sculpture itself is dated to the 9th century AD and is attributed to a Benedictine monk. But in the Palazzo dei Conservatori, where the Capitoline Museum is currently located, the sculpture of the she-wolf was placed only in 1473. That is, in the second half of the 15th century by order of Pope Sixtus IV. Throughout its existence, the Capitoline wolf sculpture has never been restored. However, in 1997, the local authorities responsible for the supervision of art monuments in Rome made the decision to finally carry out a complete restoration of this ancient sculpture. It was decided that the restoration work would be undertaken by an art restorer and metallurgy specialist named Anna Maria Caruba. The restoration of the sculpture took 3 years. Afterward, Ms. Caruba made a sensational statement. The famous Capitoline wolf was actually made in the Middle Ages, not using ancient techniques but rather a technology from a later period.
The fact is that in ancient times, large bronze sculptures were cast in parts and then these parts were welded together, while the statue of the she-wolf was cast as a whole. However, this type of casting, in one piece, was only adopted in the 8th century AD. The transition to this type of casting, in one piece, was driven by the development of bell casting. In the 8th century, churches began to build bell towers, and bells were rung in them to call the faithful to service. But even large bells could not be welded together because it would affect the purity of the sound. It was from that time that they began to cast products without welding, in one single piece, just like bells. That's the difference.
The results obtained through other methods of investigation suggest that the age of one of the world's most famous sculptures is exaggerated by at least 1,500 years.
In order to determine the structure of the alloy and study the composition of the materials, we conducted thermoluminescence, carbon, mineralogical, and stone graphic analyses of the earth remaining from the casting to determine its origin. These analyses yielded ambiguous results. The dating of the she-wolf varies between the 6th and 14th centuries AD. The analyses have never provided results confirming that the sculpture was made in the Etruscan era, that is, before Christ.
However, historians, upon receiving these new data, are not rushing to rewrite the biography of the Capitoline wolf. Many are skeptical of the research conducted by Ms. Karuba because she is an art restorer, not an archaeologist. However, the results she obtained were supported by a professional archaeologist, Professor Adriano La Regina of the National Institute of Archaeology and Art History.
I was immediately interested in Signora Karuba's work because she is a very attentive and serious specialist. She pays great attention to technical details and materials, especially when it comes to works of art. Many historians attach primary importance to the study of the aesthetic aspect and consider the analyses that use modern technologies to be of lesser importance. In any case, based on these studies regarding casting techniques and the analyses conducted, we can conclude that the she-wolf has a medieval origin. I am confident in this.
Another fact that indicates the sculpture of the she-wolf was made in the Middle Ages is the following. Historians claim that in ancient Rome, there existed a special collection of documents that describe the restoration of all monuments and any observations regarding their condition. Mentions of the she-wolf sculpture in this collection only appear in the 10th century. But are there any ancient depictions of the sculpture that have been preserved?
There are no depictions of the Capitoline wolf prior to the Carolingian era. The earliest depictions date back to the 14th century.
The statue of the Capitoline wolf is not the only work of art that historians of the Scaliger school have attributed to the distant ancient times.
I can give an example of two other bronze artifacts located in Perugia. They are slightly larger than the she-wolf. One of the artifacts is a lion, and the other is a fantastic creature, a half-griffin, half-beast. These two large works of art, which have been the subject of much debate in the past, were considered ancient Etruscan works. However, it was later discovered that they were also medieval works because a document was found in the archives of Perugia mentioning payment for the production of these two figures. It is a reliable and authentic document.
Unfortunately, there have been no documents found yet that confirm the medieval origin of the Capitoline she-wolf. Therefore, the museum is not in a hurry to change the official date of the statue's creation indicated on the plaque. Moreover, they try not to comment on the results of Anna Maria Karuba's research.
The public should be given the opportunity to form their own opinion. This is an important matter. Museums are places of recognition and study for the public, not just for scholars. I believe that we should provide the public with accessible tools to form their own opinions based on accurate data, documents, and reliable information.
So, if historians stop persisting in their misconceptions and impartially study the results obtained through modern methods of researching ancient monuments, they will finally convince themselves that the statue of the Capitoline she-wolf was made no earlier than the 14th century AD. Chronological peculiarities also surround the famous equestrian statue of Marcus Aurelius. Modern historians claim that this statue was supposedly made between the 166th and 180th years. That is, in the 2nd century AD. However, for example, the medieval scholar Ricobaldo of Ferrara, who lived in the late 13th and early 14th centuries, claimed that the statue of Marcus Aurelius was cast and erected by the order of Pope Clement III. But Clement III lived not in the 2nd century but in the 12th century. This statement by Ricobaldo did not sit well with scholars who studied the history of Rome several centuries after him. For instance, the German historian and writer of the 19th century, Ferdinand Gregorovius, wrote in confusion, "How could such a work in bronze be executed at such a low level of art that Rome had at the time?" If we follow Gregorovius's logic, then according to him, the Romans in the Middle Ages were incapable of producing anything worthwhile. And many centuries earlier, during antiquity, they were highly skilled masters who confidently cast such massive bronze masterpieces as the statue of Aurelius. It is not only the date of the statue's creation that raises doubts. It is uncertain who created it and where it stood in ancient Rome. There is a hypothesis that the statue was initially placed in front of the Roman Forum. Today, it is nearly impossible to confirm or refute this. But the main mystery lies elsewhere. Since in the Middle Ages the statue was discovered quite by accident in one of the Roman squares, it was allegedly mistaken for an image of Constantine the Great rather than Marcus Aurelius. It is believed that this mistake is what saved it because during the grim era of the Middle Ages, the Church deliberately destroyed ancient masterpieces as pagan heritage. However, Constantine, as is known, made Christianity the dominant religion of the Roman state and is admired by the Church as a saint, so his image was preserved. But why did the Romans eventually come to believe that the ancient sculptor portrayed Marcus Aurelius and not Constantine? After all, there are no inscriptions on the statue. The pedestal on which it stands was made by Michelangelo only in the 16th century. It turns out that it's quite simple. In the 15th century, the librarian of the Vatican Apostolic Library, Bartolomeo Sacchi, examined the image of Marcus Aurelius on ancient coins. He thought that the resemblance was strikingly similar to the statue. That's how, based on a mere visual similarity, the identity of the writer and the time of the creation of this masterpiece were established. In the Italian capital, there is another historical monument whose extraordinary antiquity also raises doubts. It is Trajan's Column, erected in Trajan's Forum. It is believed that this monument is already 1,800 years old. The column is covered with relief drawings from top to bottom. Historians claim that they depict events from the two wars of the Roman Emperor Trajan with the Dacians, which supposedly took place in the 2nd century AD. However, these claims are not supported by any concrete evidence because there is not a single inscription on the column itself, no names, dates, or geographical names. Moreover, at the top of the column is not a statue of Trajan, but a statue of St. Peter, which was installed by the order of Pope Sixtus V in 1588. And in appearance and structure, the column closely resembles the pillars depicted on Orthodox icons. It is well known that in Christianity there was a custom of stylitism. Stylites or pillar hermits were righteous individuals who chose a special feat for themselves, standing on a pillar. Today, it is believed that stylites climb to the tops of columns, towers, or rocks to seclude themselves from the world and devote themselves to piety and continuous prayer. However, it is more likely that stylites climbed the pillars only at certain times to proclaim prayers, similar to what Muslim muezzins still do. Muslims built minarets for these purposes, and Christians, presumably, built pillars or bell towers. Today, only the voices of bells are heard from the top of Christian bell towers. In ancient times, bells were most often installed not on bell towers, but on low platforms or walls of bell towers. And the pillars that we now commonly associate with bell towers could be used mainly as minarets. This is depicted on ancient icons as well. For example, on icons of Saint Simeon the Stylite, he is depicted praying at the top of a pillar bell tower. Therefore, it is likely that Christian bell towers and Muslim minarets had the same purpose. They were considered as elements of completely different architectural styles only from the 17th century, after the division of the unified Christian cult into several branches. Now let's return to Trajan's column. Externally, it gives the impression of a monolithic structure, but there is a balcony with a railing at the top. This means that it can be ascended. Indeed, the description of the column mentions that it contains a spiral staircase inside, leading to the very top. It appears the column is a Christian structure that was originally built as a pillar minaret for prayer. If that is indeed the case, it becomes clear why at the top of the column there is a statue of Saint Peter, who is considered the first Pope of Rome. As we have already mentioned, according to the traditional historical version, the statue was installed in 1588, so it is likely that the column itself was built around the same time. This version is also supported by the depictions on the column. The artist placed crescents, stars, and Christian crosses on the shields of many warriors. Historians cannot provide an explanation as to why the shields of supposedly ancient warriors are adorned with Christian symbolism. There is not a single word about this in the literature describing Trajan's column. However, if we shift the time of the construction of the column to the 16th century AD, everything becomes clear. The fact that the age of the column does not exceed 500 years can also be judged by the speed of its deterioration. It should be noted that scientists have been continuously observing ancient architectural monuments for only the last 300 years. But this time has been sufficient to make sure that from century to century, the rate of decay of ancient structures remains roughly the same. Now let's compare how Trajan's column looked in the 19th century and how it looks today. It is evident that in about 100 years, the relief in many places has deteriorated. Numerous cracks and dents have appeared. And if the column had indeed been built in the 2nd century AD, then after 1,800 years, there would be almost nothing left of the unique relief. Let's take a walk through the Vatican Palace. These are the Borgia apartments. They were built by order of Pope Nicholas V in the mid-15th century. From 1492 to 1503, they served as the residence of Pope Alexander VI Borgia. Prior to him, these rooms did not have such luxurious decorations. It was Pope Alexander VI who commissioned the artist Bernardino di Beto, known as Pinturicchio, and his apprentices to paint the rooms for 2 years. The Borgia apartments consist of several rooms. On the vaults of one of them, known as the Room of the Símbolos, there is a unique zodiac. Interestingly, there is no detailed image of it on the internet or in albums. Only individual fragments are published. Until 2005, even during private visits to the museum, photography of this zodiac was not allowed. It was only Pope Benedict XVI, elected pontiff in 2005, who permitted visitors to take photographs in the Vatican museums. The zodiac consists of 8 individual paintings. 7 of them are dedicated to the 7 planets known in ancient times: Jupiter, Mars, Venus, Mercury, Saturn, as well as the Moon and the Sun. The 8th painting, labeled Astrology, depicts the creation of the ancient Ptolemaic cosmology. Like in many other zodiacs, in this one a certain date is encrypted. It is natural to assume that it represents the date of the creation of the Ptolemaic cosmological system. After all, no other events are depicted in the zodiac. However, if this is indeed the case, deciphering this zodiac may be highly undesirable for historians. Hence, it is impossible to find a complete image of the zodiac in open print. According to the Scaliger-Petavius chronology, the ancient astronomer Claudius Ptolemy, who created the famous model of the universe, lived in the 2nd century AD. It is believed that his system was used for 1,500 years, until the emergence of Nicholas Copernicus' heliocentric system in the 16th century. Italian zodiacs are usually quite complex. Their creators aim to make them incomprehensible at first glance. The correspondences between planets and constellations depicted in the zodiacs are sometimes so vague that it can be said in advance that such a horoscope will have many astronomical solutions. To determine which date is accurate, additional astronomical information is needed. Not all medieval zodiacs contain such information. Fortunately, the zodiac in the Room of the Símbolos does have such information. By using the Horus computer program, it is possible to find all the horoscope solutions within the range from 500 BC to 1900 AD. These calculations were conducted by mathematicians Anatoly Fomenko and Gleb Nosovsky. It turned out that the horoscope in the Borgia apartments has only one solution: August 28, 1228 AD. But if this zodiac contains the date of Ptolemy's invention of his cosmological system, which he outlined in his famous work, Almagest, then the traditional dating of Ptolemy's life is erroneous. Historians assert that Ptolemy lived in the 2nd century AD, while the date recorded in the zodiac, 1228 AD, corresponds to the 13th century AD. The difference is 1100 years.
The date recorded in the astronomy zodiac in the Borgia apartments fundamentally contradicts the Scaligerian dating of Ptolemy era as supposedly the 2nd century AD. In fact, it contradicts the Scaligerian picture of history as a whole. On the other hand, it perfectly fits into the new chronology. Let me remind you that according to one of the most important results of the new chronology, obtained by Anatoly Fomenko, Vladimir Kalashnikov, and myself in the mid-1990s, is the dating of the star catalogue Almagest. According to this dating, the catalogue, which was included in Ptolemy work, could not have been compiled earlier than 600 AD and later than 1300 AD. Therefore, the date 1228 falls exactly within this interval of independent dating of the Almagest star catalogue, thus perfectly aligning with the new chronology.
Thus, it turns out that the Ptolemaic system of the universe, as outlined in the Almagest star catalogue, was created in the 13th century AD. However, the Almagest as a whole could have been edited and supplemented until the 16th century when it finally fell into disuse with the advent of the theories of Copernicus and Tycho Brahe. It is believed that the Castel Sant'Angelo was built in the 2nd century AD by the order of the Roman Emperor Hadrian, who constructed the castle as a mausoleum for himself and his family members. Historians claim that initially, the Castel Sant'Angelo was only a tomb, but later became the residence of the Roman popes and simultaneously their treasury. At one time, there were quite a few ancient stone papal coats of arms on the walls of the castle, but over time, many of them were knocked down. For example, both coats of arms located at the very top, directly under the statue of the Archangel Michael crowning the castle, were knocked down. Two more coats of arms were located in the most honorable place, directly above the entrance to the castle. Knocking them down was not so simple as they were on a sheer wall. Nevertheless, they were also destroyed. Why was this done? Some historians explain the destruction of the coats of arms by the fact that they belonged to Pope Alexander VI Borgia, who went down in history as a monster of debauchery. Since Borgia's successors strongly despised him, they knocked down all his coats of arms. But this explanation seems rather strange. Firstly, it is completely unclear why they disfigured the castle in which the popes continued to live. If they detested Borgia's coats of arms, they could have removed them neatly or replaced them with their own coats of arms. It is strange that they did not do so. Even more strangely, while knocking down Pope Alexander Borgia's coats of arms, they inexplicably left the inscriptions with his name untouched. For example, beneath the knocked-down coat of arms located above the entrance to the castle, there is still a clear and intact inscription that reads, Pope Alexander VI arranged this in the year of our Savior 1495. Moreover, under some of the knocked-down coats of arms, we can see inscriptions with the names of other popes. Today it is difficult to understand exactly what was depicted on the papal coats of arms in Castel Sant'Angelo, and why they were ruthlessly destroyed. One thing is clear: a thorough cleansing was carried out in the papal castle. The authentic ancient images hindered someone and were destroyed. The vague explanations of historians provide grounds to suggest that the entire history of Castel Sant'Angelo was not as it is commonly believed today.
According to our reconstruction, Castel Sant'Angelo was built around 1453 by fleeing popes who carried away the treasure from the captured Constantinople, the state treasury. The treasury was transported on ships, and today the chests in which it was stored during those years are exhibited in the Museum of Castel Sant'Angelo. The popes saved the treasures from the Ottomans who captured Constantinople in the mid-15th century.
Upon arriving in their new location in Rome, the first thing the fleeing popes needed to do was to create a fortified secret treasury to store the brought gold. Time was of the essence, and perhaps that's why they didn't start building anew but rather used an existing structure. Most likely, at that time, there was a city theater in the castle, not an ancient tomb as historians claim.
Castel Sant'Angelo stands on the very bank of the Tiber River. According to our reconstruction, the ships carrying the treasures, which departed from Constantinople before its capture by the Ottomans, stopped at the riverbank near the remnants of the old theater. This theater was urgently fortified, transformed into a powerful fortified castle, and the treasure was transferred there from the ships. This happened shortly before the year 1453 AD.
For greater reliability, the transformed castle, originally a theater, was additionally surrounded by a fortification wall with towers at the corners. For some reason, later popes wanted to conceal the fact that their predecessors had found refuge in the old city theater. Therefore, they invented a legend that in ancient times, Castel Sant'Angelo was the mausoleum of the Roman Emperor Hadrian. To make it more convincing, historians even created a model of the mausoleum, which, by the way, strongly resembles the theater. Even today, it is evident that Castel Sant'Angelo, first and foremost, is a fortified secret treasury, modeled after Egyptian pyramids. In our previous films, we discussed that according to the theory of Fomenko and Nesovsky, the pyramids were secret royal treasuries of the great Russian Empire of the 14th–15th centuries. Certainly, this did not prevent them from simultaneously serving as temples or tombs. The pyramids were an ideal place for the secret storage of treasures. They couldn't be easily plundered because they were in plain sight of the entire population. Such audacious theft of the treasury would be seen as sacrilege. It is possible that the pyramid could only be opened in the personal presence of the king. To enter the treasury, one had to first move a multi-ton stone blocking the entrance in the pyramid's wall, then proceed into the inner chamber without triggering any of the traps prepared for unwelcome guests. Finally, after taking the treasures, one had to make the entire journey back. It is clear that all this could not be done unnoticed. In the Castel Sant'Angelo, the path to the inner chambers goes through a spiral ascent, gradually rising within the stone structure of the castle. The ascent was made spacious, presumably to accommodate loaded wagons. However, it was well suited for firing at attackers during an assault. Additionally, just before the entrance to the inner chambers of the castle, the passage narrows. Above it, there is a wide well through which attackers could be targeted from above, and if necessary, the passage could be blocked completely, denying access inside. Apparently, this was the old imperial way of safeguarding the treasury. This is how the Castel Sant'Angelo was designed. The Vatican is believed to have been founded in the 4th century AD. According to the commonly accepted chronology, it was during this time that Emperor Constantine the Great embraced Christianity and made it the dominant religion in the Roman Empire. However, Vatican guidebooks state that all the buildings in the Vatican today were constructed no earlier than the second half of the 15th century. The oldest structure in the Vatican is considered to be St. Peter's Basilica. It is commonly believed that it was built in the 4th century, during the time of Constantine the Great, and subsequently underwent renovations. However, this is not the case. Historians themselves acknowledge that Emperor Constantine the Great ordered the construction of a completely different basilica on the tomb of the Apostle Peter, which no longer exists. It is reported that soon after its construction, it was heavily damaged. The alleged culprit was Pope Damasus I, who ordered the excavation of canals in the vicinity. As a result of this construction, water flows were directed towards the basilica, which led to its destruction. Interestingly, despite this, Pope Damasus was canonized, and a courtyard in the Vatican is named after him, the Courtyard of St. Damasus. After the destruction of the first basilica, the current St. Peter's Basilica was constructed, which many mistakenly consider to be very ancient, but it was actually built in the 16th and 17th centuries. In 1626, it was consecrated by Pope Urban VIII. But was there ever a first basilica at all? Let's look at several old drawings depicting the Vatican in the 16th century. Here, for example, is an ancient fresco from 1537 to 1541, located in the Castel Sant'Angelo in Rome. It shows Bramante Theatre, descending the slope of the hill and connecting the Belvedere Papal Castle, located at the top of the hill, with the Borgia apartments. The Castel Sant'Angelo is visible in the distance to the right. However, in the foreground or slightly to the left, the St. Peter's Basilica should be visible, but it is not there. There is no ancient basilica depicted here either. Instead, there is a pond on which a naval spectacle is taking place. All around is empty space. Looking at this fresco, it becomes clear why historians use the word theater in a figurative sense when referring to Bramante Theatre. It's as if to say that it was not actually a theater and it received that name by mistake. However, the fresco clearly shows that the lower part of the theater was a pond used for maritime performances. Above, in the Belvedere courtyard, nightly tournaments were held. One such tournament, organized by Pope Pius IV to celebrate the marriage of his relatives, is depicted in a preserved ancient fresco. Therefore, there was no ancient basilica above the tomb of St. Peter during that time. Let's take a look at another old painting depicting the Vatican in the 16th century. In this painting, the upper part of the Bramante Theatre is shown. In the 16th century, it housed a collection of supposedly ancient marble sculptures that belonged to Pope Julius II. Unfortunately, the location of St. Peter's Basilica is not captured in this painting. However, it is clear that there is an open field surrounding the Bramante Theatre in all directions. In the middle of the 16th century, it was still completely uninhabited. It is unlikely that it would have remained so empty if a majestic basilica had been standing there since the 4th century, erected by the order of Constantine the Great himself. Here is a drawing from the Schedel's Nuremberg Chronicle, supposedly issued in 1493. The Vatican is also depicted in this drawing. There is a fortress on a high hill, likely the Belvedere. Below, there is a papal palace resembling a medieval knight's castle. And in the place of St. Peter's Basilica, there is an ordinary house with the inscription, St. Peter, on it. It is evident that this house bears little resemblance to a church. Most likely, this inscription was added to the drawing later. The Vatican of the 16th century is also depicted in the famous Cosmographia by Sebastian Münster, supposedly from 1550. The drawing clearly shows the Castel Sant'Angelo and the bridge over the Tiber. Nearby on the hill, the Belvedere is visible. However, the Bramante Theatre does not yet exist. From the Castel Sant'Angelo, a fortress wall extends, connecting it to the Papal Palace, which is built like a knight's castle with a tall watchtower. Next to this palace, there should be the old St. Peter's Basilica, supposedly located where the current St. Peter's Basilica stands. However, there is no inscription indicating it. At the same time, the Papal Palace is labeled Palatium Papae. Could it be that the Papal Palace held more significance for Sebastian Münster than the basilica erected by Constantine the Great over the tomb of the Apostle Peter? It is highly unlikely. Most probably, there simply was no basilica there in the 16th century. If, according to historians, the Vatican has more than 1,500 years of continuous history, then the Vatican Library should have existed for an equal number of years. Many people believe this to be the case. However, as the historians themselves report, the famous Papal Library was only established in the 15th century. Though, they do not explain why the thought of creating a book depository did not occur to the popes for 1,000 years. It was only in 1475 that Pope Sixtus IV issued a bull to establish the library. It is known that its foundation was based on the collection of Pope Nicholas V, consisting of 834 Latin codices. The historians of the Vatican do not provide information on how the Pope came to possess such a number of manuscripts. Supposedly, he personally gathered them somewhere for his own use before becoming Pope and then brought them to the Vatican. Nicholas V was at the head of the Vatican from 1447 to 1455, which is 20 years before Sixtus IV. Interestingly, in 1475, the Papal Library already had 2,527 Greek and Latin manuscripts. If we exclude Nicholas V's collection, the library had 1,693 books at the time of its foundation. If Roman popes had been collecting and preserving these books since the 4th century, as is often believed, it is not surprising that such a large collection had accumulated over 1,000 years. Book production in the Middle Ages was expensive, so they were carefully preserved. Furthermore, books were essential for religious services. But if the library was actually founded only in the 15th century, where did such a large number of books come from?
In our opinion, the library appeared in the Vatican during the reign of Pope Nicholas V at the time of the Vatican's foundation. Presumably, the Imperial Library of Constantinople was transported from the city captured by the Ottomans. Initially, it contained about 800 books. Most likely, Pope Nicholas V did not personally gather books here and there. The foundation of the library was based on the old Imperial Library. Over time, the number of books increased, and within 20 years, approximately 2,500 books were collected. By 1475, a considerable collection had formed, leading to the establishment of the library. Thus, everything happened naturally.
The chosen location for the Vatican Library is also interesting. It was situated in the lower floor of the northern wing of the Papal Palace. Before the establishment of the library, it had been a cellar or storeroom. It is strange that the popes did not find a more suitable place to store the books. Anatoly Fomenko and Gleb Nosovsky argue that there is nothing surprising about it.
The fact that the Vatican Library had to be accommodated in a cellar or storeroom indirectly confirms our belief that the Vatican was still under construction in the mid-15th century. There was a shortage of space, which is why the library had to be placed in some former utility room.
The Vatican Library obtained a more spacious location only 100 years later, during the reign of Pope Sixtus V in the late 16th century. Upon Sixtus V's order, the architect Domenico Fontana built a transverse wing in the Belvedere courtyard, on the site of Bramante's original staircase. The papal library was then housed there. The walls of the new luxurious building were adorned with paintings depicting ancient libraries and inventors of writing. And, naturally, they depicted episodes from the history of Pope Sixtus V's reign. Certainly, the chronological gap of over 1,000 years between the supposed foundation of the Vatican in the 4th century and the appearance of the Vatican Library in the 15th century is so noticeable that historians are forced to explain it somehow. However, their explanations, as is often the case, sound completely unconvincing. Historians say, yes, the Vatican Library was only founded in the 15th century. But it should not be assumed that there was no library in the Vatican before that. There was a library, just a secret one. So secret that nobody outside knew anything about it. Therefore, medieval records about it did not survive. The existence of a secret library is just a speculation that cannot be verified today. Therefore, it is evident that such a strange explanation does not explain anything. The Capitoline she-wolf, Castel Sant'Angelo, the statue of Marcus Aurelius, these are just a small part of the so-called ancient monuments, in whose history strange contradictions have been discovered. For other little-known facts of world history and new research by the authors of the New Chronology, watch our upcoming films from the series, History, Science or Fiction.